March 21st, 1873, Brooklyn, New York. William Goodrich climbed the steps to his brother's brownstone on DeGraw Street, concern gnawing at him. Charles had not been answering messages. The door was unlocked. Never a good sign. Inside, silence. William called out. No answer. He made his way down to the basement, and there, laid out as carefully as a body in a funeral parlor, was his brother. 3 bullets in the head. Face washed clean, hair combed, arms folded peacefully across his chest. But here is what made William's blood run cold. Someone had placed a pillow beneath Charles's head, fashioned from a damp cloth draped over a pair of boots. 3 towels hung nearby. One was stained with blood. This was not suicide. This was not robbery. Someone had cared enough to clean him, to arrange him, to make him look as though he were at rest. And William knew immediately. You never did this yourself. This is murder. Charles Goodrich seemed like a man who had everything in order. At 41, he was a successful property developer in Brooklyn, a booming neighborhood in 1873, where brownstones were rising faster than weeds in spring. He and his brother William owned an entire block of houses under construction on DeGraw Street. After his wife's death, Charles had been living in a boarding house in Manhattan. Professional, respectable, recently engaged to a woman named Adeline Paybor. A proper courtship, the kind that led to formal announcements in the society pages. But neighbors on DeGraw Street knew something else. Charles had been keeping a room in one of his unfinished buildings. To supervise construction, he said. All through the spring and summer of 1872, those neighbors saw him sitting on the stoop with an attractive young woman. They would smile and wave. She appeared devoted to him. Then, by autumn, she vanished from public view. But residents noticed something curious. Very early in the morning, before most people were awake, they would see her slipping quietly out of Charles's building, always before dawn, always alone. Charles Goodrich was not the man he appeared to be, and that lie, that foundational deception, was about to unravel in the most violent way possible. When police arrived, what they found defied logic. 3 shots to the head, impossible to self-inflict. Yet someone had remained with the body. They had washed the blood from his face, combed his hair, changed him into a clean shirt, arranged him carefully on the basement floor with that strange pillow of boots and cloth. This level of care, this intimacy with death, it pointed to one conclusion: a woman. In 1873, that was not simply a guess. It was a pattern police believed they recognized. Male killers fled. Female killers often stayed, compelled by a twisted mixture of guilt, love, and the domestic instincts that society had drilled into them. But something else complicated the scene. Charles's watch was gone. All his cash was missing. Someone wanted it to resemble a burglary. Except burglars do not wash faces. They do not comb hair. They do not construct pillows from boots. The staging felt almost tender, and that tenderness made it far more unsettling. Police discovered a letter inside the house. It was addressed to Charles's father and dated February 15, 1873, just 5 weeks before the murder. It was a confession of betrayal so complete and so devastating that it revealed the motive for everything that followed. The woman signed herself Amy G. She wrote that she believed herself married to Charles Goodrich. They had participated in a ceremony on May 20th, 1872, performed by what she thought was a clergyman. She had become pregnant. She gave birth in December. Then Charles told her the truth. The marriage was a fraud. The clergyman was actually his friend, Dr. Reuben Smith. The entire ceremony had been nothing but theater. Now, Charles intended to marry Adeline Paybor, his real fiancée, and he wanted this woman gone. On February 15th, he threw her belongings into an unfinished unit in his building. He evicted her like a tenant behind on rent. She wrote to his father, "I have neither friends nor money. It seems like some dreadful nightmare." This was not merely heartbreak. In 1873, for a woman with an illegitimate child and no husband, this was social death. No respectable employment, no marriage prospects, the very real possibility of starvation. Charles Goodrich had not simply broken her heart, he had destroyed her future. And 5 weeks later, someone placed 3 bullets in his head. The name on everyone's lips was Kate Stoddard. Police began piecing together fragments of her life. She had worked as a straw hat maker, one of the few respectable trades available to working-class women. Earlier, in 1872, she had lived at 45 Elizabeth Street with a woman named Mary Handley. But as investigators dug deeper, something more troubling emerged. Kate Stoddard was not her real name. She had been born Lizzie Lloyd King in 1847 in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and in April 1867, at just 20 years old, she had been committed to the Taunton Lunatic Asylum. The diagnosis read, "Mania manifested by excitement, irascibility, incoherence of speech, and violent conduct," delicately described by physicians as a disease peculiar to females. In other words, she was a woman who did not behave as society expected. She was discharged in September 1867 and disappeared into the anonymity of New York City's working poor. She made hats. She taught occasionally. She moved between New York, Philadelphia, and Hartford. She never returned home. Until she answered a personal advertisement placed by Charles Goodrich. Those advertisements were a gamble for women. Sometimes they led to marriage. Sometimes they led to something far worse. Kate believed she had found security. Instead, she became Brooklyn's most wanted woman. A reward of $3,500, roughly $85,000 in today's terms, was offered for her capture. And no one could find her. Patrick Campbell was not a typical chief of police. He had not risen through the ranks of law enforcement. He began his career in the printing office of the Brooklyn Eagle newspaper before moving into politics. Chief of police was simply his latest political appointment. That lack of traditional experience became his greatest strength. While veteran detectives chased false leads, including an Englishman named Barrett, a burglar known as Pop Ty, and a mysterious Spaniard named Roscoe, who may never have existed at all, Campbell made a radical decision. He hired Mary Handley as a detective. In 1873, this was unheard of. Women did not serve in law enforcement. But Handley had lived with Kate Stoddard. She knew her habits, her posture, her face. Campbell paid her $2 a day, a respectable wage, and sent her searching. She traveled to Glen Falls, to Gloversville, to Albany. Every lead turned cold. Kate Stoddard had vanished as completely as if she had never existed. The press mocked Campbell's petticoat detective. His own officers doubted him. But Campbell understood something essential. To catch a woman, sometimes you need a woman. And then, on July 8, 1873, nearly 4 months after the murder, Mary Handley stepped off a ferry in Brooklyn and saw a face she would never forget. Let us return to early 1872. Imagine Kate, though she went by Amy, by Stoddard, by several names, reading personal advertisements in a New York newspaper. For working women, these ads were a lifeline, a respectable way to meet potential husbands when social circles were limited and opportunities scarce. Charles Goodrich's advertisement promised stability, a successful widower, a property owner, a man seeking companionship. They met. He was charming, older, established. She was beautiful and intelligent. Her former roommate described her as remarkable, a gifted musician who had graduated at the top of her class despite a troubled youth. He courted her properly. On May 20th, 1872, they were married in a ceremony that appeared entirely legitimate. Dr. Reuben Smith wore clerical robes. There were witnesses. Every detail suggested authenticity. Kate believed every word. He moved her into a room on DeGraw Street. Not quite his primary home, he explained. The house was still under construction. But they were together. In her letters, she called him "my dearest husband." Then she became pregnant. Charles persuaded her to have an abortion. In 1873, abortion was not only illegal, but frequently fatal. Women died from botched procedures with alarming regularity. But Kate trusted him. She did it. And that was when everything began to shift. By the autumn of 1872, Charles was engaged to Adeline Pabor. He introduced Kate to acquaintances as "my sister." He hid her. He visited only late at night. The pregnancy returned, whether because the abortion failed or because there was another conception. In December 1872, Kate gave birth alone in that unfinished building. Finally, Charles revealed the truth. Their marriage was worthless. Dr. Smith was not a minister. The ceremony meant nothing. She had no legal claim to him, to his property, to anything. On February 15, 1873, he threw her belongings into another unit and told her to leave. What made this devastating was simple. Kate had no family to return to, no friends who knew her real identity, an illegitimate child to support, a documented history of mental illness that would make respectable employment nearly impossible. Charles offered her money to disappear, to remain silent, to never mention their relationship to his family, to become a ghost. Kate refused. Instead, she wrote that letter to his father, hoping someone in the Goodrich family might possess a conscience. No one responded. On March 20th, 1873, Kate descended into Charles's basement. They argued. She pleaded. He told her once more to leave and promised financial assistance if she would simply go away. She drew a revolver. She fired 3 times. Here is where the case becomes truly haunting. After shooting Charles, Kate did not simply flee and vanish. She left the house. And then she came back. She washed his face. She wiped away the blood. She combed his hair until it lay neatly in place. She changed him into a clean shirt. She positioned his body on the basement floor with the care of an undertaker preparing someone for a wake. And then she did something that still chills historians. She collected some of his blood into a gold locket and wore it around her neck. Today, psychologists might describe this as dissociation, or guilt, or a traumatized mind attempting to undo the finality of what it had done. But in that moment, Kate was living inside an unbearable contradiction. She had killed the man she loved, and part of her could not accept that he was gone. Then she did something even stranger. She vanished in plain sight. Kate rented a room at 127 High Street in Brooklyn, less than a mile from the murder scene, under the name Minnie Waltham. She told her landlady, a widow named Ann Taylor, that she was a hat maker. She paid her rent of $2.50 per week on time. She was friendly, pleasant, entirely ordinary. She continued commuting to Manhattan each day to make straw bonnets. By June, she was even bringing materials home and working from her rented room. The Taylor family liked Minnie. When she disappeared on July 8th, they worried that something terrible had happened to her. And here is perhaps the most audacious detail of all. Kate attended Charles Goodrich's funeral. While police searched across New York State, while newspapers printed her description, while a reward of $3,500 hovered over her name, she walked into his funeral service. She stood among his family and friends. She paid her respects. She hid in plain sight, mourning her victim publicly, while the entire city hunted for his killer. July 8th, 1873. 4 months of searching. 4 months of false leads and increasingly wild speculation. Mary Handley was heading toward Manhattan on the Fulton Ferry. It seemed like another day that would lead nowhere. The trail had gone completely cold. And then, stepping off the ferry toward Brooklyn, she saw her. Kate Stoddard, or Lizzie King, or Minnie Waltham, or Amy Gilmore. A woman with a dozen names and countless hiding places. She was simply there, walking in broad daylight. Handley immediately seized Officer Doherty and demanded that he arrest her. Doherty hesitated. You could not simply detain a woman based solely on recognition. But Handley insisted. As they escorted Kate toward the police station, she casually dropped several letters into the street. Doherty retrieved them. They were addressed to individuals in Manhattan and New Jersey, suggesting that Kate must be living in Brooklyn, somewhere near the ferry route. At the station, Chief Campbell questioned her. She denied everything. She was not Kate Stoddard. She had never met Mary Handley. She was an innocent woman being harassed. But Campbell noticed something. A large gold locket hung from a chain around her neck. "May I see that?" he asked. "No," Kate replied firmly. Campbell took it anyway. He struggled with the clasp, which seemed stuck, and finally forced it open. Dark, dried fragments fell to the floor. Kate lunged forward, gathered them quickly, and swallowed them. "What was that?" Campbell demanded, grabbing her arm. "Did you take poison?" She looked at him calmly. "That is blood, dried blood." She refused to speak further. Kate was in custody, but suspicion was not proof. Police still needed to locate where she had been living and recover tangible evidence. Campbell made another bold decision. He ordered his officers to knock on every door in Brooklyn, every single door. They asked a simple question. Had any household been missing a young woman since the previous Tuesday? By the end of the day, they had collected 300 names. Investigators narrowed the list, cross-referenced physical descriptions, and focused on neighborhoods near the ferry. Eventually, they arrived at Ann Taylor's boarding house on High Street. The landlady reported that her tenant, Minnie Waltham, had been missing since July 8th. Police used a latchkey found among Kate's belongings. It fit perfectly. Inside her rented room, they discovered Charles Goodrich's watch, his ring, his pocketbook, 2 pistols, one with 3 empty chambers, and all of his missing cash. Not a single dollar had been spent. This was definitive. Kate confessed. Yes, she was Kate Stoddard. Yes, she was Lizzie Lloyd King. Yes, she had shot Charles Goodrich. The mystery that had gripped Brooklyn for 4 months was finally resolved. July 12, 1873. The inquest was scheduled at the courthouse on Livingston Street. By 10 in the morning, a full hour before proceedings began, every seat was taken. People stood in the hallways. They pressed against the windows. They strained for a glimpse of the woman who had haunted Brooklyn's imagination for months. This was not merely a murder case. It was a sensation. 9 witnesses took the stand. Lucette Myers, a woman who had been intimately involved with Charles, identified Kate and claimed that a mysterious Spaniard named Roscoe had played a role. Police believed Roscoe was likely a product of her imagination. Adeline Pabor, Charles's fiancée, testified that Charles had introduced Kate as his sister. The betrayal must have been staggering for both women. Mary Handley described the moment she recognized Kate at the ferry. Anna Knight, the landlady's daughter, confirmed that Kate had lived on High Street under the name Minnie Waltham. David Goodrich, Charles's father, identified the letter signed Amy G. He stated that he had warned his son to extricate himself from the relationship. Then Kate was called to the stand. She identified herself as Lizzie Lloyd King. Profession: bonnet maker. On the advice of her attorney, she declined to say anything further. At 6 in the evening, the jury delivered its verdict. We find that Charles Goodrich came to his death by pistol shot wounds inflicted by Lizzie Lloyd King, alias Kate Stoddard, with intent to cause death. Kate was remanded to Raymond Street Jail. 3 prisoners were assigned to watch her continuously to prevent suicide, standard practice in high-profile cases. She requested newspapers and read every account of her own proceedings with sharp attention. Kate remained in Raymond Street Jail for more than a year awaiting trial. During that time, she was described as composed, even agreeable. She read her Bible and an Episcopal prayer book. The New York Times suggested she was pretending to be very religious, though whether it was performance or sincere faith is impossible to determine. She also proved difficult for her own defense. She dismissed multiple attorneys. She complained about inaccuracies in press coverage. She wrote letters to newspaper editors correcting the record. When one publication misstated the language of the judge's commitment order, she responded in writing, "Your Honor's attention I wish to call to the wording." The indictment read that Charles Goodrich came to his death by pistol shot wounds inflicted with intent to cause death, not feloniously and willfully and of her malice aforethought. She demanded precision. She demanded accuracy. She fought for control over her own narrative. In May 1874, Dr. Charles Corey examined her to determine whether she was mentally competent to stand trial. On July 15, 1874, more than a year after her arrest, a hearing concluded that Kate was not fit to face trial. The judge ordered her committed to the State Lunatic Asylum in Auburn, New York. There would be no trial, no conviction. Effectively, a life sentence without a verdict. Kate protested. She asked directly whether she had been found guilty of murder. "No," the judge replied. "I have determined that you are not in a mental condition to be tried." Her response was chilling in its clarity. "Oh, if I am willing to take that risk, I think the rest ought to be." She wanted her day in court. She wanted to tell her story. She wanted judgment by a jury. Instead, she was declared insane and absorbed into the asylum system. The residents of DeGraw Street acted quickly. Within days of the murder, they petitioned to rename their block. On April 15, 1873, the section between 5th and 6th Avenues became Lincoln Place, named in honor of Abraham Lincoln, as though invoking his memory could cleanse the violence that had stained their street. Eventually, the entire eastern stretch toward Prospect Park was renamed. DeGraw Street disappeared from that portion of Brooklyn altogether. Mary Handley applied for the $1,000 reward offered by the Brooklyn Common Council. After testimony from Chief Campbell and others confirmed her essential role in the arrest, she received it in 1874. In modern terms, that would amount to roughly $25,000. Patrick Campbell remained Brooklyn's chief of police until 1895. In a retirement address, he described the Kate Stoddard case as one of the most memorable of his career. Decades later, in 1906, he gave an interview to the Brooklyn Daily Standard-Union and once again recalled the case, though some details had blurred with time. Of Kate, he said, "A commission adjudged her insane, and she was sent to an asylum. She may be living yet, for all I know." And that is the unsettling truth. We do not know what ultimately became of Lizzie Lloyd King. Records indicate that in 1880, she was still confined at the Auburn Asylum. There, she composed a remarkable letter to New York Governor Alonzo B. Cornell. Inmates were not permitted pen and paper, so she cut individual letters from a Bible provided by the American Bible Society and stitched them, word by word, onto pages. In that letter, she protested New York's lunacy law, which allowed individuals indicted but not convicted of crimes to be confined indefinitely in asylums. She described it as an ex post facto punishment, a sentence without due process. Whether the governor ever responded remains unknown. After 1880, Lizzie Lloyd King vanishes from the historical record. She may have died within the asylum. She may have been released quietly. She may have survived into the 20th century under yet another name. We simply do not know.